Welcome to this short video which explains how you can use GyroFX to analyze your aerobatic positioning. Let's load a sports-level competition flight at Finland where there was a fairly strong 15-knot wind. When the flight is first loaded, GyroFX will set up a chase camera with whatever settings you have defined in your default preset. Starting the animation will set the aircraft flying, and you can look at figure shapes and rotation angles. However, an important part of any competition flight is the positioning of the aircraft in front of the judges and within the aerobatic box. GyroFX has tools to help you analyze your positioning. The first stage is to configure the 3D viewer to clearly show the flight path relative to the aerobatic box. Open the Settings panel and in the 3D Viewer tab, make sure that the ribbon is enabled. Set the ribbon width to about 5 and the opacity to 100%, which will make the ribbon easy to see. I'm going to set the background to solid colors and turn off the ground grid to give us a plain blue background. I'm also going to make sure that the aero box is enabled and the wind arrow is visible. Next is the field of view. The higher the number, the wider the view. When reviewing a flight in chase camera mode, it is often better to have the field of view set to about 40 or 50 to get a close-up of the rotation angles. However, we are now interested in getting the judge's viewpoint, and a wider field of view of say 80 gives a more realistic simulation of a human eye. If I now click on the Flight tab, I will see other settings related to the flight. There are some important settings here. The flight type can be training or competition. We'll be looking at this in a bit more detail later, but for now I'll set the flight type to training. This tells GyroFX to find the center of the sequence and places the aero box around the sequence. I'll set the class to Power Sports. This setting determines the height of the aero box and the position of the judge relative to the center of the box. This is calculated from the minimum heights allowed for each class. For example, Sports and Intermediate have a minimum height of 1,000 feet. The box entry direction determines the side of the box that the flight will enter. In this case, the sequence started from the judge's right-hand side. This is only used when the flight type is training. While we are here, make sure that the wind direction and wind speed are correct for your working height, because that can be a major factor in positioning. Let's close the Settings panel and have a look at the flight. Clicking on the View button on the animation bar will reveal a number of view options. First, let's click on the judge's view. This places the camera at the judge's position. Using the mouse, we can zoom out a little to show the judge standing on a platform. Notice that GyroFX has worked out the center of the sequence and placed the aero box around the sequence because we're in training mode. The red wind arrow is at the center of the aero box, showing the relative wind direction. We can now use the mouse to rotate around the aero box. And we can see that the wind was at about 30 degrees to the A-axis, blowing towards the judges. This view is showing us how tight our flying was relative to the size of the aero box. There are other fixed point views, such as directly from above, and a right-hand view, and a view from the front of the box. However, these views are only relative to the center of the sequence and not what a judge would have seen standing at their actual location. What we now need to see is the actual judge's view, and to do that, we need to know the physical location of the judge and the aero box. Google Earth is a great way of getting position information. Here is the location of the flight with a marker for the judge position and one for the center of the aero box. This is from the viewpoint of a pilot about to enter the aero box. Right-clicking on a marker and selecting Properties will show a dialog window, from where the latitude and longitude of the judge and the aero box can be copied. Back in GyroFX, open the Settings panel and select the Flight tab. At the bottom, in the Advanced section, there are some input boxes for you to enter the latitude and longitude values. Simply copy the relevant values from the Google Earth dialog windows and paste them into the GyroFX settings. We can now set the flight type to competition, which will tell GyroFX to use the latitude and longitude locations. Close the settings panel, which will reload the 3D viewer and display the judge and Aerobox in their actual locations. By selecting the judge view, we can see what the judges actually saw. Using the mouse controls and views, we can see that the sequence was offset from the center of the Aerobox and all of the figures were in the front of the box with the last few figures over the top of the judges. With the strong on-judge wind, the sequence should have been started towards the back of the Aerobox. The official score sheet from the judges backs this up with many near positional marks. Of course, these techniques can be used on any training flight in any location. This flight was flown using a farm as the judge and a hedge as a reference line. In training mode, the Aerobox has been positioned around the sequence and we can see that the flight fits into the box quite nicely. We'll now switch to competition mode to use the correct latitude and longitudes of the farm and the box. Now select the judge's view. We can see that the pilot has started the sequence a little too early and has not repositioned upwind during the sequence. The wind is blowing off judge, so the whole sequence has drifted downwind. Some of the figures are outside the box. That concludes this short video showing the powerful tools available in GyroFX to let you analyze your positioning while doing training flights without a coach on the ground. If you want to find out more about how GyroFX can help improve your aerobatics, then there are more tutorial videos on this YouTube channel. Alternatively, you can get a free evaluation license by registering at gyrofx.net.